Hello, everybody. Welcome to the debut edition of G.O.A.T Talk, where we are going to talk about the greatest of all time. Hence, you know the acronym. It's been around for a while. I, myself, Derek King from the Derek King Show. And over here to this side.
I'm on this side of you, bro. This side of you.
No,
bro.
it's I get backwards. I forget it's mirrored, right? So
right.
We have the Spurge over here. And what we're going to do in this format is me and him are going to go back and forth about our Mount Rushmore of who we feel is the greatest of all time in a particular sport doing a particular thing.
Hold on. It ain't just a particular sport, Derek. So like in our debut episode, we're going to talk about the greatest quarterbacks of all time to never win a Super Bowl.
That's correct.
So
we will preface every show by saying that, but that's kind of the scope of what we're going to be doing on every single show.
Right. We may talk about the greatest wrestlers of all time. May talk about the greatest pitchers of all time. May talk about the greatest left-handed batters of all time. We might even talk about the greatest kickers of all time. You never know on G.O.A.T Talk what we will talk about.
It's so what we're going to be doing today is that you already had touched on it. We're going to be talking specifically about the greatest quarterbacks that have never won a Super Bowl. That's right.
Correct.
We're going to talk about the greatest quarterbacks that have never won a Super Bowl. And we're both going to be giving our Mount Rushmores and our reasons as to why.
Correct.
So, Spurge, anything you have to add before we get going?
This is going to be a very interesting list because I think we're going to agree on at least 3. And then I think 1 we're going to disagree on. For sure. I think we will agree on at least 3 of them and disagree on 1 in the show. So what I think we should do is we should make a little thing is how many of these are we going to agree on each week?
To be honest with you, I don't know if we will.
You don't? Well, I'm just saying, I think we're going to agree on 3 of them and disagree on 1. That's just my opinion.
Now, what we will disagree on is positioning, potentially, where they rank in that hierarchy. I think that that's going to be really difficult to be able to do.
Yes.
There will be some that will say, okay, unilaterally, yes, this individual is there.
Well,
but
I think
as we go down the line, we will come across those instances where we'll be split.
Where I think number 1, we'll agree on number 1. Number 1, I think we both will agree on.
All right, so let's go ahead and get into it.
Do we go number 1?
Number 1, you go ahead, Spurge. You start it off.
I mean, listen, I have a tattoo, a Blues tattoo on my leg of the 1990s Blues logo. Everybody knows that I hate the Blues, but that was, my dad had passed away, and I made the bet for the Blues logo. I finally lost it, so I made it into that. And his favorite player was Curtis Joseph, number 31. I have that on there, but it's in Miami Dolphins colors. So when I look at it, I see 13. And I mean, the number 1 greatest quarterback of all time to never win a Super Bowl, the man who held all the records for the longest time, the one and only Dan Marino.
Dan
Mr.
the man.
South Beach himself for Miami Dolphins football. The greatest of all time. That's never won a Super Bowl.
Mr. South Beach, but let's not remember where he heralds from, and that would be the Pennsylvania region.
The good old state
of Pitt.
And then went to Pitt, and the Steelers could have drafted him, but they didn't.
That's right.
They passed on him.
They passed on it on Dan Marino. They could have drafted the local kid. They chose not to, and look at where it ended up for the Steelers. Obviously, they still had success, but had they had Dan Marino, would we be having the same conversation about the Dolphins even being in Miami anymore?
Let's be true.
Realistic, because for a lot of those years, during the Shula years and during the Jimmy Johnson years of him being in Florida, they had a lot of sustained success. And so you look at that and go, would Miami still be there? I don't know. It remains to be seen. But I agree with you 110%. Number one at the very, very top of that list has to be Dan Marino.
It has to
His
be.
career accolades alone, how many playoff games he was in, championship games.
I'm glad you said that, because if you think about it, he in the 84 season, right? 84 season. At the time it was a record. He threw for 5,084 yards, an NFL record that has now been broken. Okay. And 48 touchdowns, which has now been broken, right? Marino led the league 5 times in passing touchdowns and 3 times, or passing yards, and 3 times in passing touchdowns.
That's correct. Yes.
Okay. Led for the longest time until Brady broke the record, led the league in passing yards with over 61,361 yards and 420 touchdowns. Listen, it's a shame. And this is in a time and place when there were not the quarterback rules there are now.
No, and passing was not as prevalent.
No, it wasn't. I mean, Derek, let's agree. It can, there's always I got another great idea for the GOAT talk, Derek. Like, could you take a player and put them in another era, right? Because we always get, players are faster and stronger now, and blah, blah, blah. But can you imagine if you put Dan Marino in today's game with the rules they have?
It's the same mentality that I have with Joe Montana. Or with
even Joe, but Joe's won Super Bowl, so he don't count for this.
Joe's won Super Bowls. The reality is, if Joe hadn't gotten hit as hard as he got, let's not forget that championship game against the Giants.
Oh my God!
He just got his clocked clean. That took years off of his career. That one hit took years off of Joe Montana's career. And so, thankfully. And this is where Dan Marino got smart later on in his career. He stopped trying to run. And so those golden legs that he had kind of more turned to stone, because he realized the game was changing in Marino's aspect. I have to develop as a pocket passer.
Correct.
I remember early on in his career watching Dan Marino fire bullet passes over the middle and thinking, oh my God, if that hit that guy square in his chest, it'd blow a hole straight through him. As hard as he was throwing that football.
I mean, right, yeah. And you look at a lot of your great pocket passers to this day, they say Dan Marino is who I modeled my game after as a pocket passer. There's no other guy that they modeled their game. I mean, even Joe Montana said, I was nowhere near as good as Dan Marino when it comes to throwing the ball. Tom Brady, same thing. Peyton Manning, same thing. These are guys who, with Brady and Manning, who went on breaking Marino's record, but they were like, I couldn't throw the ball like him. I couldn't throw the ball as hard as him.
This is hard and it's accurate. I mean, there's only one other player. There's 2 other players that come to mind that are that kind of cut, right? But that would probably be, if you take Marino and have him as number 1, then I would say close to him would be Peyton Manning, and the other side would be John Elway. Ooh. Now, Elway didn't have the accuracy that Manning had or what Marino had.
Correct.
Manning didn't have the arm that Elway and Marino had, but he had the accuracy that they didn't possess. But Marino possessed all of it.
All of it.
The whole package. He had it all. And so whenever I look at that, I say, okay, these are the closest guys. There's been other quarterbacks that have come and gone in the league that could throw absolutely a country mile. I remember when Tony Banks came in with the Rams, and he had such an arm. He could outthrow the coverage. He could outthrow the defense. He could outthrow the wide receiver. He just threw over everybody and out of the end zone. But he had no touch. He had no accuracy. He had no feel. And that's where Dan Marino, and why Dan Marino is our number one on the GOAT list.
Exactly.
So now,
all right,
let's move to number 2.
And I'm see, you like how we did that? We did that 10 minutes. We spent 10 minutes on that, on Dan Marino, and why he was number 1.
And that's how you got to do it. So
All right,
since
so
you
let's.
started last time,
Yep.
I'm going to start this time.
Okay.
And to probably not a surprise to you, maybe it
Mhm.
is a surprise to you, but I'm going to take Fran Tarkenton at number 2 for the greatest of all time quarterbacks that have never won a Super Bowl. It's got to be Fran Tarkenton.
Ooh, see, this is where I said this is where it's going to get tricky, right? I'm going to agree, but I'm going to put another guy with Fran Tarkenton because they were equal.
Well, you can't. You got to pick between the two. You got to pick.
All right. Well,
one or
then
the
I'm
other.
going to put. Actually, I'm going to put Jim Kelly above.
Oh, that
Fran
was gonna,
Tarkenton.
that. I agree. I would put that 1A, 1B, but I still think Tarkenton beats him out.
Okay, well here's I get why you would say Tarkenton because Tarkenton and me and the A Train have had this conversation before, right? Tarkenton is really your first mobile quarterback that you saw in the NFL in a time where it was pass, run, pass.
Rushed for over 5,200 yards in his career.
Correct. I mean, that's why they called him Crazy Legs Tarkenton, because you never knew where he was going to go on the field, right?
Right.
I mean, he threw for 47,000 yards, had 350 or 42 touchdowns. He went 124 for 109 and six ties with a record of over 18 seasons. He was 6-5 in the Super Bowls.
That's right. Yeah.
Or in the postseason. He made it to 3, but he lost every single one of them, right?
Correct.
Here's why I put Kelly over him, because Kelly went to 4 straight.
Kelly did go to 4 straight in the 80s and early 90s.
Yep.
And in all of those, he ran up against, let's see, Washington in 91.
Yeah.
He ran up against the Steelers, I believe, in one of them. No.
And then the Cowboys twice.
It was Cowboys twice, Washington once, and who was the Giants?
The Giants.
The kick, the Norwood kick.
Yes, the Norwood kick that you see all the time.
That's right.
So the thing with
looking at Tarkenton, if you look at him even closer, you go, well, he had 2 stints with Minnesota in the 60s and then in the 70s. Yep. Everybody forgets that mid kind of late 60s with the New York Giants. To where every year that he was with the Giants, except for his last year, he was in the Pro Bowl.
But it's true.
And then he was number 3 in the MVP votes in 1970. He went 9-5. But the problem is that he only threw for just a little under 2,800 yards, 19 touchdowns versus 12 interceptions. He didn't run that much. He only ran for 249 yards in comparison, because that's where he learned to transition from that mobile quarterback, I got to run all the time, to, hey, I need to learn how to pocket pass a little bit.
So now here's why I make the argument for Kelly. Are you ready?
All right.
See, here's what's going to be great about this, because at the end of the show, we could change these. We could see if there's people we want to move and all of that, right? But here's the thing with Jim Kelly, why I put him at number 2, is he has 9 playoff wins, tied with Donovan McNabb for most in NFL history. And as he's just had 2 seasons where he made the postseason and failed to win a playoff game. So he only made, in all the years that he made the postseason, there was only 2 seasons that he didn't win. But he never won the big game.
I want to make a point. I want to point something out about something.
Okay.
Between Jim Kelly and Dan Marino. And a lot of people probably aren't aware of this statistic, but I'm just going to go ahead and give it to them. Dan Marino and Jim Kelly were both born in the state of Pennsylvania.
Yes.
Dan Marino went to Pitt. You know where Jim Kelly went to college?
Wasn't it Penn State?
Miami.
Oh, that's right.
How ironic.
Yes.
That Jim Kelly, who was born in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, could have went to Pitt, didn't go to Pitt, went to Miami. Dan Marino went to Pitt, and then Dan Marino ended in Miami, and Jim Kelly. Jim Kelly played the USFL too.
Yeah, that's what I was just getting ready to say. You got to remember there was those 3 years where Jim Kelly was in the UFL or the USFL back in the 80s and actually did really, really good.
That's right.
So you know what? Okay, you changed my mind. I will put Fran Tarkenton at number 2.
Now, here's the question
because
that I've
Kelly
gotta
did
ask.
have success in the USFL back in the 80s.
Well, and that's where I kind of have a tendency to go. We're not just talking, if we just specifically hone in on the NFL,
Okay.
then Tarkington beats him because of the shortness of Jim Kelly's career. Now, some people would argue that Kelly's career, because of the shortness of it, is weighted heavier against Fran Tarkington. I have a tendency to disagree. In that time frame, playing in the NFL, to have the longevity that Fran Tarkington did, based off of the platform of the type of player that he was,
18 years.
I'm surprised he lasted as long as he did, because he should have been knocked well out of the league by that point because of the way that he played the game.
But see, here you go. This is why I'm going to put Kelly back above Tarkenton, because you got to remember Kelly played the greatest game that no one ever saw, again with the Houston Gamblers and the LA Express against Steve Young.
Am I going to shock you? Am I going to shock you with my number 3 pick?
Well, you might, but I mean, you think about it. Kelly threw for 574 yards in that game.
Right.
Where if you would combine the stats, he would own the record for the most passing yards in one game over Norm Van Brocklin.
Norm Van Brocklin did with the LA Rams back in, I think it was 1950 something
like that. 51.
Was it 51?
Yeah. I pulled it up and I have the stat right here.
I think he had Elroy Crazy Legs Hirsch as his wide receiver.
That is true. And you got to remember, they were losing that game. Yeah. And they came back and won that game.
That's right.
So I'm sticking with my number 2. I'm sticking with my number 2 for Jim Kelly.
Right. You're going Jim Kelly, and I'm going Fran Tarkington. Okay. Yep. Now we're going to go to number 3. This is where you start off with your number 3 pick.
I've already kind of said who my number 3 is. If you guys haven't been paying attention, my number 3 is Derek's number 2 with Fran Tarkenton, because for the longest time, there was nobody in the Minnesota that had done what Fran Tarkenton has done for Minnesota as a quarterback, winning games for him. Now, you can make the argument that Kirk Cousins, but he never got him to the Super Bowl, right? You can make an argument for Dante Culpepper, which he might be on a GOAT Talk episode later on about that. But Fran Tarkenton, in my opinion, will go down as the greatest Minnesota Viking quarterback to ever play the game. Hands down. I mean, he may not lead all the records, have all the stuff that some of these guys have, but what he did is what no other Viking quarterback has done, is got him to 3 consecutive Super Bowls. 3 consecutive. He got him there. And I mean, again, the only reason why I take him down from Kelly, where you had Tarkenton at number 2, was because of the Kelly thing that he did in the USFL. Because you remember, he even went to the USFL championship, one of the games, and still lost it. So Jim Kelly has never won a big game. Has never won the big game ever for anybody. Or did he do it in college?
And so, Kelly, I don't know if he had any like really huge games like Flutie had with Boston College, or there was any like huge standout games in college that I can recall.
No, he never did. He never did it in college.
But yeah, no. So, so you're going with that.
I'm going with Tarkenton for the simple fact is
number 3,
and he still holds. I mean, Adrian Peterson is the only other person that has more rushing yards in Minnesota Viking history than Fran Tarkenton does.
I think that this is where it starts to go off the rails. And the reason that I think that it starts to go off the rails, and I'm going to make a very important point with my number 3 pick, and that's this right here. At number 3, drum roll, please. Ching! Warren Moon at number 3, greatest quarterback to never win a Super Bowl. And here is the reason as to why. The reason that I picked Warren Moon is not only did he never get to play in a Super Bowl, he didn't even get to play in a Super Bowl. And he only made it to the playoffs just a handful of times. And when I mean a handful of times, I mean 9 times in his career. He had 17 to 14 touchdown to interceptions, and he never played in a conference championship game.
That is true.
The closest he ever got was in the divisional game, and it was against the Chiefs. I remember that game specifically because guess who was playing? Joe Montana. But he didn't have his first NFL season until he was 28. Who else was about 28, 29 years old when they started in the NFL and had a stellar career? That would be Kurt Warner. But if you look at Warren Moon's stats and you just look at the stats, it's going to blow your mind because of the career that he had in the USFL, or was it the USFL? It was the CFL is what he had. The career in the CFL. And he won Grey Cups, and he played for years.
The Edmonton Eskimos.
Right. Warren Moon not only did that in his career, but he also played until the ripe old age of 44 years old. He played a total of 10 years with Houston, 3 years with Minnesota, 2 years with Kansas City, and 2 years with Seattle. That is an accomplishment by any stretch of the imagination. And let's be clear, even at the age of 41 years old, he was still playing full seasons, 41 and 42, with Seattle, until he finally ended up picking up a clipboard with Kansas City in 99 and 2000. That is why I would put, because of longevity and everything else that's in the picture, and the fact that he never even got to sniff a Super Bowl, would be Warren Moon at number 3. Now you just wait. As we go along, this is where the divergence is. This is where this is where it goes off the rails.
You did throw us off the rails, but I guess we are saying it the greatest to never win a Super Bowl, right?
Right. Not to make it to a Super Bowl and not win it, but the greatest to never win a Super Bowl. So it could be categorized as anything you want. They just can't have won a Super Bowl.
That's true, because he did win.
Even as a backup.
That is true. That is true. He did win 4 consecutive Grey Cups.
He did, but he did not win a Super Bowl.
You're right. He didn't. That's your number 3, huh?
That's my number 3.
Did I already do? I already did my number 3.
You already
right?
did your number 3 with Fran Tarkington. My number 2 was Fran Tarkington.
That's right. That's right.
Your number 2 was Jim Kelly.
Well, it's funny. Wow, we already got all these. We got one left.
We've got one left, but at this point, we're getting to this stage now where we're going to have to just kind of argue it out. But this is we're going to come up on a hard 30, so that's where we're going to just pretty much.
Gotcha. All right. So my number 4.
Got our argument time. Go for it.
My number 4 is your number 3, Warren Moon. I mean, if you think about it,
just great pick.
If you think about it, Warren Moon threw for over 70,000 yards. And it combined, I mean, if you would combine the CFL,
just in the NFL, nearly 50,000 yards.
Right. If you combine the CFL and the NFL, then Warren Moon is hands down the greatest quarterback to ever play the game of football. The greatest. I mean,
there's no argument.
There's no argument.
Because I just picked him at number 3. You're not going to get any kind of argument with me at number 4. Matter of fact, again, I think that if Fran Tarkington wasn't there and
Right.
what he did in the time frame when he was playing football,
Mm-hmm.
I would probably put Warren Moon higher.
I mean, look, you're talking 49,325 yards in the NFL. Just passing yards alone, 291 to 233 touchdowns to interceptions. Now let's even go to a CFL. 21,000 yards. Here's the best part about it, Derek. 21,000 yards on 2,382 attempts and completed 1,300 of those.
You're just proving my point. You're just making yourself look bad. That's all you're doing. You're just making yourself look bad.
Look, we'll have this is. I'm going to give you spoiler alert, as like Paul Heyman likes to say, because that could be another GOAT
This
talk.
is not just a prediction.
This is not a prediction, but this is a spoiler. When we do the greatest black quarterbacks of all time, my number one, I'm telling you right now, is Warren Moon. Hands down, Warren Moon. If we do the greatest,
that's kind of edgy.
I don't care. Don't care. When we do our GOAT talk of the greatest back quarterbacks, players of all time, Warren Moon's number one, and you're not going to ever change my mind because you can't find the person to beat him with the stats.
It's hard, isn't it?
It's hard. I mean,
all right. So now we just got to kind of put a nice little bow tie on it.
Well, who's your number 4?
Number 4.
Yep.
Okay. So again, this is where it goes off the rails. We've got names, right? Yep. We all got names of who we think is the greatest or who we've looked at statistic wise and the era that they played in. And I'm going to tell you the one person that I think comes in for me, and it's going to jump a lot of other players, and some people are going to disagree with me on this, but because of the era that they played in and because of the coaching that they had and everything else and where they ended up, I'm going to pick at my number 4, Dan Fouts.
Oh, I can see it. I can see it.
Just because he had the Air Coryell offense, which started in St. Louis, which prior to was actually San Diego State, where he started, and he came to St. Louis, was unceremoniously ran out of town by Bill Bidwell and his cronies. Back to San Diego, where he ended up installing the Air Coryell offense, which gave Dan Fouts a litany of success in his career. And if you just go and you look at Dan Fouts' career, he played for one team his whole career.
Pretty much.
He threw for over 43,000 yards, 254 touchdowns, and 242 interceptions. He was not necessarily a terribly mobile quarterback. He could move if he needed to, but he was a pure pocket passer. He was one of the most accurate quarterbacks in the league during the 1970s to the early mid 80s. He was one of the most accurate quarterbacks in the league. For 3 years in a row, he threw for over a league leading 4,000 yards every year from 79 to 81.
That is true. He did.
He had a stellar completion rate at the time, ending his career in 1987 with a 58.8% completed ratio. Now, people look at that now and go, "Oh, well, that's peanuts." You got normal guys that are 61, 62%. And we think they stink. You also got to remember at that time frame, passing was not as prevalent. For him to have in 1979 a 62.6 completion ratio with 4,082 yards, 24 touchdowns, but the biggest thing that killed him was he had 24 interceptions.
That is true.
Year. That is brutal. And that was one of the things that hamstrung Dan Fouts' career was the interceptions. You also have to remember, too, he did not have a lot of wide receiver support.
No. For him to even lead the league in passing 6 times with a mediocre receiving core, that was good.
It's good. Well, that does it for today's show.
That's it.
We've wrapped it up. Goat Talk is
did.
over, but we're going to be back again next week, and we're going to have another show. We'll figure out what we're going to do. It's going to be a surprise every single week. So thank you, everybody, for tuning in. I'm Derek King. This is the Spurge over here.
Over here now.
We'll be back. Yeah, over here now.
Over here. You're over there.
Right. Yeah.
Right. We'll see you guys next week.
Take it easy.